In 2022, the New York Mets had one of the best outfields in all of baseball. Last year, they fell off a cliff. Can the Mets outfield return to form in 2024? I'll break it all down on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers who join today will get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. You can make an argument that the New York Mets had the best starting outfield in baseball in 2022. With Brandon Nimmo, Starling Marte, and Mark Canha, they had three above-average outfielders. Two of them were all-star caliber players. Marte was an all-star. Nimmo certainly put up an all-star worthy season. And if you look at FanGraphs wins above replacement, this was the second best outfield in baseball. Their 12.6 F4 trailed only the New York Yankees, but a 16.3 F4 as a team, but Aaron Judge contributed 10.4 of those wins above replacement. If you actually look at his season F4, it was 11.6, but 1.2 of those wins came when he was playing DH. Overall, though, the Mets outfield, if you look at a group of three starters, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better collective in the game that year. Their batting average of .275 led all of baseball. Their on-base percentage of .355 led all of baseball. Their .432 slugging percentage was fifth best in the game among team outfields. And then their weighted runs created plus, which is a stat that measures hitters on a league average of 100. So in this case, measures a team at a league average of 100, was 128. Now, the best mark, of course, belonged to the New York Yankees, who had a 134 WRC plus. But Aaron Judge, when he was playing the outfield, had a WRC plus of 215. So that, again, buoyed the Yankees. If you look at on-base percentage, it's very similar. The Mets had the top mark, as I said, at 355. The Yankees were 9 points below that at 346, but Aaron Judge got on base at a 433 clip when he was playing in the outfield. Bottom line, that group was great for the Mets, and it was just three above-average starters day in, day out, playing the game at a high level. And when one of them was down or out of the lineup for a day, they slid Jeff McNeil out into the outfield. If you look at how many guys even played the outfield for a minimum of 50 plate appearances, you had the starting three, you had Jeff McNeil, and then you had Travis Jankowski and Tyler Naquin, who both got around 40-plus games played. It was not even 50 games played for either of them. Now, you look at the stats each of those three put up. Nimmo, 274 average, 367 on base, 433 slug, had 16 home runs, a 133 WRC plus. So he was 33% better than your league average hitter. He had a 5-win season when it comes to wins above replacement. Starling Marte played 118 games. He hit .292 with a 347 on base and a 468 slug. He contributed 16 home runs, had a 134 WRC plus. And then you had Mark Canha, who played 140 games. He hit .266, 367 on base, 403 slug. None of them slugged below 400. None of them got on base below 350, really. Marte, 347. But the point is, they all got on base at a really high clip. And if you look at weighted runs created plus, all of them were at least 25% better than your league average hitter. A huge reason why the Mets were so successful in 2022 because their outfield was that good. What happened, though, last year? It all fell apart. 2023, the Mets outfield dropped to the 11th best F4 in baseball at 8.4. 4.3 of that came from Brandon Nimmo. So the rest of the outfielders that played for the Mets last season only contributed about 4 wins above replacement. Starling Marte and Mark Canha were each nearly 3-win players the year prior. So collectively, about 6 wins. So there's the big drop-off. The on-base percentage for the Mets outfield dropped from 355 to 344. The slug dropped 14 points as well, from 429 to 415. And while we don't care about batting average as much as we used to, it's all about on-base percentage. I think it's pretty notable to say that, wow, the Mets outfield went from a 275 average down to a 259 average. And Brandon Nimmo was the constant. Okay, he had a 274 batting average each of the last 2 years. Now, he did have a slightly better season when it comes to wins above replacement in 2022 compared to 2023, largely due to defense because he hit more home runs last year. But the bottom line is, with Nimmo being just this steady presence, the outfield production dropped off significantly, and that's largely due to the regression of Starling Marte, as well as the regression of Mark Canha. And eventually they traded Mark Canha, and then you had other guys filling in throughout the season. But the outfield production last year was a big reason why this team struggled so much. You look at WRC plus. This is, again, that stat that measures hitters on a league average of 100, and it's based on each season. So to compare a WRC plus from 2022 to 2023 is not an exact science because it's a league adjusted stat. So if there's more offense in 2023 than there is in 2022, that stat's going to be skewed a little bit. But still, if you're comparing the Mets outfielders to a league average, 2022, it was, again, a 127 WRC plus. 2023, that dropped down to 113. So they were still above average, and again, largely due to Brandon Nimmo and also Tommy Pham last year. But it just shows you that that outfield was just nowhere near as productive. And I haven't even gotten into the defensive numbers, which is another big piece of the puzzle. So as we turn the page now to 2024, and you have Nimmo and Marte returning, but a new cast of characters coming in with Harrison Bader set to play a big role, Tyrone Taylor, maybe some DJ Stewart, obviously Jeff McNeil still hanging around. Can the Mets get back to where they were in 2022? Can Starling Marte bounce back? What went wrong last year? And is the outfield that is going to be prioritizing defense going to find a way to be more valuable than a group in 2022 that held their own defensively, which we'll get into in the next segment here, but really was just carried by 3 great at-bats in your lineup day in and day out? Are they going to miss Mark Canha in that sense? I'll go through all of it in the next segment. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience are what brings home the winning trophy. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, from superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts to choose from for your car or truck, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. With eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Now, there are a lot of different factors that you can point to for why the New York Mets went from 101 wins in 2022 to 75 wins last year. But if you're looking for an individual culprit, there are a few that you can point to that were worse than Starling Marte, that regression that we saw. He went from a 292 hitter all the way down to a 248 hitter, 347 on base all the way down to 301. His slugging percentage went from 268 to 324. That is over 120 points in drop off when it came to slug. He was a negative value player last year. Minus 0.3 was his F4, which means the Mets would have been better off if he wasn't on the field. And as evidence of that, Rafael Ortega and Tim LeCastro combined to be over a win better than Starling Marte last year. How crazy is that? They weren't great offensively, but they played good defense. And because Marte was bad defensively and was not the same hitter, he was less valuable than those guys. And he got over 140 more plate appearances. So more time to be more valuable. But again, he was a negative player. That was a huge reason for what happened last season. His weighted runs created plus went from 134, so 34% better than league average, to 76, 24% worse than league average. He scored exactly half as many runs and played in 32 less games. He also put up 35 less RBI. So you look at Marte, if he is even 80% of what he was in 2022. You know what? Even 65% of what he was in 2022. And he's just not a negative player dragging the Mets down in the lineup and out in the outfield. They will be better this year than they were last year. That alone. Now, the other component is that third outfield spot. Mark Canha was another player that regressed. 2022, he hit 266. 2023, he hit 245. On base percentage dropped 24 points, 367 to 343. Slug drop from 403 to 381. Hit 14 home runs in 2022, only 6 home runs in 2023. Weighted runs created plus 126, 26% better than league average, down to 105, 5% better than league average. If you look at wins above replacement, he was nearly a 3-win player in 2022, 2.7 was his F4. 2023, it was 0.6. So the combination of Marte and Canha went from being, I think it was 2.7 plus 2.9. So was that 5.6 wins above replacement in 2022 to 0.3 wins above replacement in 2023. That's your season right there, those guys. Obviously, there's more to it, but that's a big, big piece. If those guys were what they had been, the Mets would have been a 500 team at least. It really did affect them. Now, Tommy Pham was the second best outfielder on the Mets last year. He was worth 1.5 wins above replacement, had a great offensive season, was traded at the deadline. We'll see how the loss of Tommy Pham affects the Mets this year. Ultimately, with a healthy Starling Marte and hopefully a healthy Harrison Bader, the defensive difference through all of this is really going to be the biggest needle mover that will put the Mets a lot closer to being one of the better outfields, in baseball. So let's get to the defense, right? 2022, the Mets were worth -5 defensive runs saved, 2 outs above average. Both of those numbers were about middle of the pack. They weren't a great defensive team, but they were at least league average. They were solid. Last year, -16 defensive runs saved, -7 outs above average. Both ranked among the 10 worst teams in baseball. I believe the defensive run saves was among the, I think they were 8th worst. Starling Marte went from 4 defensive runs saved to -7 defensive runs saved. -2 outs above average to -6 outs above average. Shows you the health, right? If he's healthy now, I don't know if he'll get back to being a 4 defensive run saved player, be above average, but can he at least be league average is what you're hoping for. Brandon Nimmo, he was better defensively in 22 than he was in 23. 6 outs above average, that dropped off to 1 out above average. -3 defensive runs saved, dropped down to -7 defensive runs saved. Him playing left field could be a nice move for him for his career. It also could be good for the Mets' total team defense because as good as Nimmo was the last few years, turning himself into at least a league average defensive center fielder, if not, better than league average, certainly in 2022. Harrison Bader, we'll get to in a minute, best defensive center fielder in baseball. An argument can be made. Let's go to Mark Canha. He was actually better defensively in 23, 4 defensive runs saved compared to -4 defensive runs saved in 2022. Outs above average had him slightly worse, -2 compared to -1. Regardless, the funniest thing about the Mets outfield is there's one player who was graded out as an above average defender in both defensive runs saved and outs above average the last 2 seasons for the New York Mets. Who is that? The Mets starting second baseman, Jeff McNeil. In both of those metrics, he has been positive. +2 defensive runs saved in 2022, +1 out above average. Last year, +3 defensive runs saved, +2 outs above average. Jeff is still excellent wherever you put him defensively. If the Mets are going to be a better team this year, they're going to need more production from their outfield. And the way they have tried to attack that this offseason is they have not gone about trying to replace the offensive production of Tommy Pham and Mark Canha. They have decided instead to focus on defense. They looked at this market. They didn't see the impact outfield bat out there that would help them enough. And they thought instead, let's skew towards defense. Let's get some center fielders in here and Tyrone Taylor and Harrison Bader. That'll push Brandon Nimmo into a corner. Carlos Mendoza said today, you're going to be seeing a lot of Nimmo on left. Right now, they're keeping it open. They're saying it's matchup dependent. They're going to play, Bader, of course, against all lefties, I'm sure, because he crushes left-handed pitching. And if he's playing well enough, he'll start a little bit more than that. But I think as the season wears on, assuming Bader is healthy, Nimmo's going to be in left field. And with Drew Gilbert and Jet Williams and Luis Angel Acuna all potentially being viable starting center fielders that are your 3 top prospects right now, I think that Nimmo's long-term home is going to be in left anyway. And we'll get to some of the defensive stuff a little bit more in the next segment here, but he should play up defensively and left. So with that sort of answer and knowing that offensively, he's just going to be a consistent force for you. The real, X factors for this team, it comes down to that just overall better team defense with Bader and Taylor in the mix. And then it comes down to Starling Marte because they still need bats in that outfield. It can't just be Nimmo. And Harrison Bader and Tyrone Taylor are very inconsistent offensive players. The Mets need Starling Marte to get back to some semblance of what he was. They don't need him to hit 16 home runs. They don't need his WRC plus to be 130. But can he hit above 270 this year? Can he get on base at a 330 clip? Because the good thing is he is going to steal a ton of bases with the new rules. So he's going to add some value, from just his speed alone on the base pass and just his ability as a base stealer. But can he get on base more? Can he avoid the prolonged slumps? And can he also be less of a detriment in right field? We'll go through all of that and also the additions of Bader and Taylor in the next segment. First, though, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Also, with the baseball season around the corner, you can start looking into MLB futures. You can check out the odds. Pete Alonso to win the MVP, maybe Francisco Lindor to win the MVP, Kodai Senga to win the Cy Young, the Mets to make the playoffs. Maybe you want to get really crazy and try to bet on them to win the World Series or the National League East. All of that is available at FanDuel. And remember, again, you place a $5 bet. If you win that, you're going to get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. If you compare the current Mets outfield to the group that they had on opening day last year, you can make a real argument this team has gotten a lot worse offensively because Mark Canha and Tommy Pham for their careers, definitely better hitters than Harrison Bader and Tyrone Taylor. But what the Mets did this offseason is they prioritized defense with their additions. Pick up Joey Wendell, defensive first infielder, trade for Tyrone Taylor, defensive first outfielder, and then their big signing of the offseason when it came to position players was Harrison Bader, who does one thing really well: run down fly balls in center field. I guess he does two things well because he also mashes left-handed pitching, but the offensive numbers are not there for Harrison Bader across his career. Compare him to Mark Canha for a second here. Harrison Bader's career high in WRC plus was 114, but that came in the 2020 season when he played 50 games. Of course, that was the COVID-shortened year. Across full seasons, the best mark that Harrison Bader has had when it comes to WRC plus is 108. So 8% better than your league average hitter. For his career, he has been 8% worse than your league average hitter with a 92 WRC plus. Mark Canha, for his career, has a 117 WRC plus. In 2022, it was a 126 mark, as we've already discussed. If you look at slugging percentage and on-base percentage, both of those stats, Canha is about 30 points higher than Harrison Bader. With all of that said, though, who has been more valuable across their careers? Defense does matter, people. Harrison Bader, 12.9 is his F4 across his career, and that's in 635 games. Mark Canha does have a higher career F4, but only by a little over a win more. He's at 14.2, so a 1.3 his F4 is 1.3 wins better than Bader. That's in 924 games played, though. So, well over 200 more games than Bader. Longer career. Defense really does move the needle for Bader. He is ranked as the #1 outfielder in baseball when it comes to outs above average, with 66 since 2018. Kevin Kiermaier, second best at 55. When it comes to defensive runs saved, 50 defensive runs saved is the 5th best mark among outfielders. So you can say he's at least a top 5 outfielder in baseball since 2018. Look at the stats since 2021. He comes a little bit closer to the pack, but still ranks among the best defensive outfielders in baseball. Tyrone Taylor has not been playing as long. So you go since 2021, he has been worth 17 defensive runs saved, 13 outs above average. Both of those rank among the top 25. So what the Mets are doing now is they've added 2 defensive first outfielders that can come in, play some center field. Both of those guys have offensive upside. Bader hasn't been able to put it together much for full seasons, but he does have a definable skill with the bat and his ability to crush lefties. And you hope he can be closer to league average against righties this year. And Taylor has a lot of pop. His isolated power numbers have been really good. So you're just trying to get some production from those guys, but it's mostly about the defense. And then the question is, what are you going to get from Starling Marte offensively? How is he going to play in right field? How much is he going to DH? And then with Brandon Nimmo, is his defense going to play up a little bit more in left field? For his career, he has been at his best in left, but small sample size. He's played well over 3,000 more innings in center than he has in left. But the career defensive run saved, it's 7 in left. It's minus 18 in center. Outs above average, he has been worth 9 outs above average in center field. So he has been better than league average there. 6 outs above average in left. And he's improved the last 2 years defensively. So I really think if you put him in a corner now, I think that defense is going to play up even more. That protects his arm. He does not have a good arm. Harrison Bader definitely has a much better arm. Starling Marte's got a good arm and right. The Mets are going to have a really good defensive outfield this year. I don't know if it's going to be, top 5 in baseball, but it certainly has a much better chance. And I'm sure they're going to be among the better half of the league when it comes to outfield defense, which is a massive improvement from what we saw last year, for sure. The offense is a big question mark, though, because you can't ignore the production the Mets got from Tommy Pham and even Mark Canha to a certain extent. These guys are quality big leaguers that put up good at-bats. As much as you might love the DJ Stewart flyer, I think if he's your starting left fielder or even your starting right fielder, whatever it ends up being, that's not the plan right now. I think you put DJ Stewart in the same bucket that you have G-Man Choi and Luke Voigt in right now. Guys that are battling for a roster spot in the DH mix. And I think Stewart at least does bring a little more value in the sense that he can be, stuck in an outfield spot compared to Choi and Voigt that are just sort of stuck at first base or DH. But it's you don't want your season pinned to the hopes of DJ Stewart. You just don't. Now, there are top prospects who could come up. So let's say Starling Marte is hurt again. Maybe Drew Gilbert's up and he's a revelation. Maybe Luis Angel Acuna or Jet Williams comes up. But as we saw last year, counting on top prospects to produce immediately, that's not a great way to find success either. It's something that can happen, but not something you can count on. What the Mets are counting on is the combination of Taylor and Bader defensively always giving you some value out there, even when Marte isn't on the field. And if Marte can be healthy and return to something close to what he used to be, the Mets have a chance to have a great outfield this season. But a lot of that is pinned to Marte. Because as much as you can buy into the Harrison Bader hype, think about the fact that he's never really put it all together, but he's shown flashes. You can look at his postseason run in 2022 with the Yankees, how he carried them through some rounds of the playoffs. There is some power there. He is great against left-handed pitching. You can look at Tyrone Taylor and say he's still young enough in his career and he has enough power that maybe there's a breakout season for him in the works. You can look at all those ifs, ands, and buts. But consistently throughout their careers, neither of those guys has put it together offensively in a way that you can trust them going into this year. Starling Marte is a guy that does have the track record. And if he's healthy and feels like himself again, that's really the biggest difference maker. And that's the exact difference maker that was present for the Mets in 2022 and the one that fell off a cliff last year and was a big reason why the team struggled so much. When you're looking at the 2024 Mets and hoping that they can be closer to 2022, I think you look directly at 3 players. Edwin Diaz, who just wasn't available last year, and then Jeff McNeil and Starling Marte. Those 3 guys were all-stars. I wouldn't call Jeff McNeil a non-factor because his versatility was huge last year, but he wasn't 2022 batting champion Jeff McNeil. These are the guys the Mets need to step up again. And they're all older, so we'll see what happens. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. Appreciate all of you who tuned in. If you're listening on the audio side, make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts, so you don't miss any episodes. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Trying to make a push to 8,000 subs by opening day. So appreciate all of you subscribe. We're within 100, so getting very close there. Want to follow me on X? You can do so at Finkelstein Ryan. You can follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now, for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel covering everything in the world of sports. Of course, I'm talking about Locked On Sports Today with our local experts from each team and our league-wide experts from each league. You find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube.